The end of the fiscal year has arrived. Happy Friday, friends. It is the end of June, which means it's the end of Microsoft's fiscal year, which means we're about to see a smattering of changes across Microsoft, which have been rumored and leaked and everything else, from layoffs to changing to how Microsoft is going to be operating. And so it's the end of the fiscal year. People are shoving things out the door to hit their KPIs, so we have a lot to talk about. Hopefully you had a wonderful week. It is officially summer in the United States. It is 1,000,000,000,000,000 billion freedom units outside. So we're going to keep it cool on the that was real terrible. We're going to do a podcast. So here we go. Let's just dive into the tech news. So Microsoft announced save the date, if you will, for their Ignite conference this year. It's going to be held in San Francisco. I actually think, isn't Microsoft going back to San Fran for Build as well? So they're going to be going back to their roots a little bit. For those who have been around the block for a few minutes, you know that Microsoft used to go to San Francisco quite a bit for these conferences, and it looks like the wheel has completely swung back around, and now they are headed back. So there you go. When it comes to Copilot, Microsoft has a ChatGPT problem. We've obviously, if I could enunciate, we have all obviously heard about the little woes, if you will, between the two companies. And it sounds like it's a little bit bigger than that, because it sounds like, and myself falls into this bucket, I would rather just have ChatGPT than Copilot. And so that's what corporate workers want. They don't want to pay for Copilot. They just want to pay for ChatGPT vanilla, because let's be honest, Copilot is usually just ChatGPT minus like 3 months. So you get more stuff faster in ChatGPT, and it appears that is how the market is reacting to it as well. If you are staying on Windows 10, there's some kind of sort of good news. Microsoft is making the Windows 10 security updates quote unquote free for an extra year, but you have to do certain hoops. So you can use some Microsoft reward points, and or I believe you have to sync your PC settings to the cloud. This almost feels like a big data grab from Microsoft, if you will. It's like, yeah, we'll if you're a home user, by the way, it's only home user. I believe Pro and Enterprise do not have these options. If you give Microsoft some data, they'll give you some security updates, at least for a year. So it does feel like they're just trying to figure out how you're using your computer more, giving more data to their graph, and so they can try to make, I guess, Windows 11 better, or maybe push better ads in your direction. I am not quite sure. So, a couple other things. Microsoft is backing its promise to help AV vendors get out of the kernel. Remember the whole thing that happened last summer, where basically everything shut down because a security vendor pushed out an update, and then all of a sudden it shut down everything. And yeah, there were massive effects from this. So Microsoft, in private preview, is endpoint security platform vendors are now able to access this new outside the security or outside the kernel functionality for their MVI partners, as they refer to them. And so this should be a stability thing at the end of the day. And we'll wait and see how this happens and this transition occurs, but it's supposed to be a lot better for the OS and improving stability of the OS. And speaking of improving the stability of the OS, the blue screen of death is going away. These things are probably related, is my guess here. One thing you will notice, and so Microsoft, yes, the blue screen of death is now the black screen of death. They both start with B's, and they will eventually use, I'm sure, some other color. It starts with a B in the future. However, what you will notice is that there's no Microsoft logo, there's no Windows logo, if you will. There's nothing talking about Microsoft here. They really wanted to get themselves out of this conversation so that when the screen goes boop, they don't instantly get blamed. It's not always going to happen. I mean, people are still going to blame Windows, but they're at least opening the door and saying, hey, maybe it's a hardware vendor problem, or maybe it's a security vendor screwed something up on your device. Don't blame us. We only have the black screen of death. And so, yeah, that is probably why they're doing some of that. So, on to the gaming news of the week, which there is aplenty. So, Hellblade 2 is finally getting that 60 frames per second update for Series X only, and it's also coming to PlayStation 5, or PlayStation, I should say. Shouldn't really surprise anyone at this point, but hey, if you want the 60 FPS, you got to play in the X, not the S. Or you can jump on over to PlayStation, which is where they're pushing a lot of things. So, other things, speaking of PlayStation, so the Xbox update has started to roll out where you can now surface Steam games, or at least the search index is working. And lo and behold, if you want to play PlayStation games on your Xbox device that is running this app, so like the Rogue, Ally X and things like that coming up, guess what? They work. There were some like rumors or myths or whatever that Sony was going to block PlayStation games from opening in the Xbox app, if you will. Now keep in mind, this is all just being backed on the backside, Steam, if you will. And to me, it never really made sense because, yeah, Sony might not love the concept, but you know what also Sony loves? Money. And do they really care? Sony is not going to come out and say, yeah, play Spider-Man on your Xbox. They're never going to do that the way that Microsoft is doing that. However, if you want to give them money to play Spider-Man on your device that's a Windows PC that runs an Xbox app and then do it through an Xbox app launcher, does Sony really care? And so Tom was just firing up Spider-Man. Like, look, it works. Sony's not blocking it. And candidly, it never really makes sense. Now watch, I can't imagine Sony would do this, right? They already put their stuff onto PCs to make more money. They're not going to advertise it. It just works. Who cares at the end of the day? I mean, realistically, who does? Sony doesn't, obviously. Speaking of things of who cares, this thing was announced this week, the MetaQuest 3S Xbox Edition. There's nothing different here. It has a green little band, and it costs $100 more. It's in extremely limited quantities, apparently, by the way. So if you really want one of these, maybe a collector's item, I guess you can do this. It costs $100 more, and you get some like 3 months of Game Pass included. But it doesn't, there's no technological difference. Technologia, if you're familiar with that. This has been a weird podcast this morning. Anyways, it doesn't really make any difference. It's just more expensive. You can already do this on a MetaQuest 3S. So anyways, it exists. I don't think it's going to be some huge home run thing or whatever else. And then also happening is Microsoft is planning Xbox major layoffs this week. The more and more time passes, the more and more this becomes a little bit clear. It looks like there's going to be hard and heavy cuts. Turn 10 has been outlined as potentially receiving large cuts. We will wait and see what happens here. We shouldn't have to wait too long. Good luck to everybody. Layoffs just suck. That's the only way to describe them. That's it. And finally for the week, as I already flubbed up once, Xbox 360 has a new update, and it's to push. I missed this. I haven't seen this dashboard experience in a while. I missed this dashboard, but it's to push the new Xbox console and new, if you will. I don't know why it took them so long to do this, but hey, there you go. There you go. That's the news for the end of June, which is typically a pretty quiet time of the year, minus the whole end of the fiscal year thing. But there are a lot of questions. There's a really deep question, too. Maybe, I don't want to say calling me out, but has questions about things that I've said, so let's just dive in here. So these are out of order that are over on the screen, but whatever. Revio Mag says, given the rise of cost of consoles, is it time to revisit the Scarlet Cloud Keystone console? When it comes to addressing latency of bandwidth, the hybrid cloud console with the local cloud compute would go beyond just current game streaming or Stadia-like cloud and controllers. If Microsoft wants to reach 1 billion gamers, it will have to be through cloud, and xCloud performance will be the biggest hurdle in achieving this goal. The problem is still pricing. Right, you can pay this money and get this device that's more cloud, the Keystone, which you are rightfully so to call out because I think it makes sense. However, like the box itself was going to be probably like $60, and then you need a controller, so you're like $120 all in. I just think they still can't get that pricing low enough to where it makes sense. To reach 1 billion users is not going to be through Keystone. It's going to be through nailing that experience on mobile devices. Everybody already has a smartphone or a tablet that can play these games, but they can't reach them, right? They're not there yet. Now, granted, someone will say cloud gaming is all there, but what Microsoft really means by getting there is their mobile store, right? That is what they're pushing towards. And so that's how they're going to get to 1 billion users. They are obviously looking for ways to lower the pricing for consoles, which I think we will see next generation, but I don't think it's going to be through like a Keystone model. I mean, at this point, it's just, they would be easier for them. Like what I hope they do is start making, so the Xbox controllers don't use, I mean, they have Bluetooth, but that's not what they use for their low latency input. They needed to start bundling that chips into like TVs and stuff, and I think that would do it. Come out with a controller that connects directly to the cloud, and then go from there, which I believe is supposed to be happening, right? That's a controller that was leaked in that FCC documentation. Jovia says, Brad, do you think we'll ever see AI helping reduce the amount of time it needs to make a game? Absolutely, and it's already happening. It is absolutely already happening. The reason we know this because AI is really good at coding. Now, not everything for coding. There's definitely a lot of scenarios where it's not great, but it's already there. So yes, it absolutely. Mr. PKI, I should say, any big news this week that will surprise us? I think it's the big news for next week that will be surprising and trying to understand what is the new shape and size of the Xbox org. So these are numbers I'm going to put out there. Somebody said they have around 16,000 people and they were looking at cutting 2,000 people. Those numbers are not confirmed. They were just through various channels that were posted, I think, on Twitter and Blue Sky and Reddit. And so, those are significant cuts. And the question to me is, the big question to me is, are any studios truly going to close? We'll find out. Jovia with the second question says, what will happen to the Xbox customers that have lots of physical games? Will they be left behind on next Xbox, or will Xbox make an external drive of some kind of wizard that lets them turn physical games into digital? So Microsoft had a disc-to-digital program that they canceled at one point. I wonder if they will revive it. I hope they're just not in the mentality of I don't really care, and then just kind of going from that perspective. I suspect they will try to find a solution. It might even be, if you have an existing console with a disk drive, using that to convert your disk into a digital, which might not be a bad idea if they can do it. Jason says, you have a podcast. Yes, I do, Jason. You're listening to it and or watching it. It used to be audio only, but the video that I post every single Friday is connected up to an RSS stream to all the favorite podcast outlets, and that is what this Friday recording is all about. Mr. PK with a second double dose of question. He says, it's starting to seem that the network and video drivers in Windows 11 are more buggy than ever. Yes, we are now having to roll back drivers. Are you seeing this in any of your machines? I am seeing funkiness. I can tell you right now on my Surface, what am I, 7th gen, the latest edition with the drivers, especially when you plug in monitors. I'm a big, heavy dock user, and so it looks like potentially the latest Windows Insider release is trying to address some of this. So hopefully, yeah, and we'll go from there. And the last big question of the week, who calls me out, if you will. Actually, he even at the bottom says, no malice, if you will. But Jesse says, 3, maybe 5-ish questions, mostly talking about this ABK acquisition and some of the things that you keep harping on about. So let's go through these. Why do you perpetuate the idea that Microsoft wasn't fully aware of the consequences and ramifications of acquiring ABK? I don't think I ever said that. I said Microsoft has to be prepared that once they make this acquisition, they have to justify the expense, right? You can't spend that kind of money and then not get results. Microsoft is not just buying this asset to do nothing. It is to prop up the Xbox org and to make it better than the sum of the parts before the acquisition. He says, I think it's very strange that you seem to be on board with that interpretation. Microsoft has owned ABK under 2 years. Yes, they've owned them under 2 years, but it was January of 2022 when they first made the announcement, which means that they should have been preparing what they were going to do once they got through there. And so he believes I'm unrealistic about what Xbox could do in that 2 years. He said, within months of the acquisition closing, I was already seeing these sentiments spread around as if simply acquiring ABK was supposed to compel millions of gamers to buy Xbox consoles. I don't think it was to buy Xbox consoles. It was to buy Xbox Game Pass. He said, I don't understand where all these expectations were coming from, and I highly doubt that anyone at Microsoft expected this kind of change. You continually stated that Xbox needs to pay back Microsoft, which I think is silly given the acquisition paid for in cash that would have otherwise been a depreciating value had they not rolled it into an asset. So that is not true. Microsoft does not keep their billions of dollars in a checking account. First off, at the very least, they put it into overnight papers. If you're not familiar with overnight papers, that is overnight transactions where they grant just a fraction percent. But when you're talking tens of billions of dollars, that's a lot of money. Now, granted, they could lose money, but it's usually a pretty safe investment for borrowing from that aspect. So it is not a depreciating asset. Aside from that, the goal of buying ABK or any company is that you're going to outbeat the market. If Microsoft could take that $70 billion of cash and just put it into, pick your index fund. It's a little more complicated than that when you have that much money, but into the market, they expect at minimum a 5% rate of return. If Microsoft is spending $70 billion on ABK, they better be expecting a greater than 5% rate of return. Otherwise, it's not a good investment for the company, right? The company is not just buying things to feel good about themselves. They're buying them to literally make more money. That is the intent, and to bolster up their portfolio of services and products to make more money. And so, yeah, they do have to, quote unquote, pay that back. Now, it's not Phil Spencer going up to Amy Hood saying, here's your check for my mortgage every month. It's the expectation that once you have this asset, which Phil Spencer very much advocated for, that you will be able to grow it and make it worth more than when we bought it. That is the whole goal, not literally paying it back, but making sure the asset that we have on our books is more valuable than what we paid for it in a reasonable amount of time. Now, it doesn't mean day one it's instantly doubling its value, but it means that they're on a trajectory that shows that they're on that path to get a better outcome than the investment coming in. So he says, my second question is, what should they have done with ABK for you to not have this interpretation? Or alternatively, what does the fantasy world where ABK actually did help them meet their expectations look like? So there's a couple things here. First off, Microsoft tried for all of 30 seconds the exclusivity model. Now, granted, they could not do that with Call of Duty, but they gave up very quickly on having games just locked into the Xbox ecosystem. I already said Hellblade 2, right, going to PlayStation already. And so Microsoft didn't really try very hard or very long to keep an exclusivity model to get people to jump over. That was step one. It also has taken them a very long time to get their premier titles into Game Pass. So they have a wealth of library. Like WoW just now finally hit Game Pass. What was the first Call of Duty? Was it the first Call of Duty? Or one of the early Call of Duties that was very popular finally hit Game Pass. So they've been like very slowly trickling these things. And it doesn't seem to make sense as to why they did it. The slow rollout into Game Pass. The third question, companies across all industry routinely, cannot enunciate, I'm recording this very early in the morning, have layoffs before the end of the quarter or before the end of the fiscal year. That is factually true, and Microsoft does not fall outside these bounds. Usually done to juice the numbers a bit, not so much to juice the numbers. It's so common that I call this a ritual. With that in mind, why is it the immediate presumption that the upcoming layoffs are due to Microsoft not hitting their goals or struggling? Where is the evidence to back this up? Well, first off, let me ask this. How many Game Pass subscribers are there? Microsoft has not shared that number in over a year. So if they were doing well, they would be sharing and shouting those numbers. If Microsoft had 70 million Game Pass subscribers right now, do you think they would be telling all of us? If they had 100 million, do you think they would be? Even 50 at this point? But they don't. They don't share these numbers. They don't tell us about console sales. They don't tell us much other than the games and services revenue raw top line number anymore because they're hiding things. That is why you don't not tell people information, because things are going so well. And even if they didn't continuously report console sales, they would at least tell us every once in a while what the Xbox Series X and S sales are. But good luck finding those numbers other than some leaked slide that showed up at like a Brazilian conference or something like that. So Microsoft itself is not giving any outbound communication that's saying Xbox is doing exceptionally well. So that is the first reason at the end of the day. And the layoffs that are happening this time around are much larger than the traditional culling that Microsoft has done in the past. Yes, every single fiscal year, they reshuffle the deck chairs. They have some underlying cuts. But if you look at what has been happening with the 6,000 cuts earlier in the spring, these were not performance-based. That's your key there, right? That is your key, is that they were not performance-based. They were just an algorithm or whatever else they were using to determine who is being let go. And so that is another tell of what is happening. Now, Microsoft is in an extremely healthy position. This is the frustrating thing. As an overall company, they are doing very well. They had a very strong quarter, but I suspect that they foresee on the horizon things are not going to be as good. And so they're trying to reel in some of their expenditures to improve their margins for the times and quarters ahead, rather than what has already occurred. That is my sort of expectation about what they are doing. But these cuts are larger than the traditional Microsoft cuts. You can go look up those numbers as well. He says, with that in mind, what is the immediate presumption? Oh, I already read that one. He says, I'm well aware that Jason and a few other journalists are framing it in this way. It's conjecture from journalists who have for years perpetuated the narrative that Xbox is struggling. Is it their own benefit to perpetuate this idea? Well, at the end of the day, everybody's in the market for clicks and hits. So if you're watching a lot of YouTube is very synonymous with big flashy headlines. It's better to lead with negative than positive. And that's a fact of media in general, that negative gets clicks, positivity doesn't. Now this Xbox channel, I'm much more positive in general just in life. I did a slightly negative video a couple days ago, and people all over like, why are you suddenly an Xbox hater? It's like the layoffs are coming. I can't ignore that layoffs are coming. That is the fact that is happening. And so Xbox is always, everything went off the rails. I stand by this for Xbox with the Xbox One. And they lost everybody with the digital library. Not everybody, but they lost the lion's share with the digital library. They teed themselves up perfectly with the 360. It was doing exceptionally well. And then Microsoft screwed up the Xbox One launch, which, by the way, I still don't think the Xbox One was a bad console. It was just poorly pitched, and then things went down from there. He says these questions are not coming from a place of malice, and that's fine. Like I like answering questions. So one other thing I want to point out here, just one other thing about this ABK acquisition that I have not brought up previously. So of the nearly 70 billion, I think it was over $70 billion at the end of the day. But of the $70 billion ABK acquisition, Microsoft recorded $51 billion of it as goodwill. And if you're not familiar with goodwill, goodwill cannot be amortized. One of the things that we're going to have to be watching for as the years come in the years future is a goodwill impairment charge. So goodwill is sort of like the things that you can't really touch, feel, taste, or deliver. I am simplifying this extremely. And so Microsoft says that stuff has a value of $51 billion, and that's how we're going to carry it. If Microsoft comes out and says, actually, it's only worth like $23 billion, that would be a huge write-down. We will see. I do believe that Microsoft may have potentially overpaid for this for how they are executing currently, but we will see. So if Microsoft does a goodwill impairment charge in the future, that'll be something interesting to watch. Anyways, the ABK stuff is fascinating. It is fascinating to see what Microsoft paid for it, what Microsoft has done for it, what the market has changed. Remember, like Microsoft bought ABK at pretty much the peak of the gaming industry, and the bottom has fallen out of these valuations. So we will see what Microsoft does here in the years and months ahead. The next generation, I think, is going to be super interesting. And as always, my friends, make sure or keep this is a perfect ending to a thing where I've flubbed many things. Keep it subscribed here, because the BS on this podcast is me.